All right, welcome everyone. Today's webinar hosted by Shopcare. I'm your facilitator, Wes van Deventer, and our speaker today actually needs no introduction, but it's Dr. Hilary Bennett from Leading Safety. This webinar will be recorded, guys, so just please be aware of that, but that just helps us for sharing the information a bit better, and also so we can learn a bit more on how to better present in the future. So just from a quick introduction before we kick off, guys, your microphone should be on mute, but if for some odd reason, if you're not on mute, please make sure that you are on mute. There is a question and answer functionality with Zoom today. So if you've got any questions for Dr. Hilary or myself, please make use of this question and answer functionality, and we'll make sure that your questions are asked towards at the end of this webinar. Also, there will be a chat function, which I will be monitoring. So if there's anything that I need to action, or anything that pops up, that I will action it and I'll have a look at it. Also, I'll constantly monitor it. All right. Also, just for you guys to, for your information, is we will be asking a couple of poll questions throughout this webinar. Please note that all the answers is anonymized, so please feel free to answer them honestly. And we do appreciate your participation into these poll questions. Then I would like to quickly just give you an overview of Shopcare and what Shopcare does. Hilary, if you just can go to slide number 2 for me, thank you. So from a Shopcare, for those who don't know, we are an industry association, you know, in the sectors of retail, manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, road transport, and we look after health and safety for the private and public sector. We really try to be that conduit. We also do a whole lot of work around critical risks. And, you know, if you move over to our website, you'll be able to see some hierarchies of controls there, generic ones. We've also got a driver guide that we've collaborated with the AA motoring company. That's a really comprehensive guide, guys. Please make use of it if you've got a focus in driver safety. We also have other webinars on there that we've done on previously. Also, you can link into our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel has also got quite a number of past webinars on there, or sharing sessions, as we like to call them, that you can view at your leisure. This particular webinar will also be part of that channel towards the end, so you'll be able to access it, say, by next week, you'll be able to access that on our YouTube channel. Other work we've been doing as well is a critical risk exposure report that is finalized and will be made public within a couple of days. So please feel free to contact us if you want to know more about that. We will be doing other work around critical risks as well, so more sharing sessions like and webinars like we've got on the screen now with John Johnstone, which is basically the leading individual from Vibration Action, and he'll be doing a whole webinar on hand-arm vibration. Then we've got a chief people mechanic, that's how he calls himself, Mr. John Peachy, and he'll be focusing on health and safety and well-being leadership. Then towards in May, we've got Sarah McGuinness. She's also CEO and co-founder of Revolutionaries of Wellbeing, and she will be talking about the topic of burnout with a COVID focus point. So I'm also interested in see that one. Then lastly, we've got 2 security and personal safety individuals, both from ex-police, ex-special forces, Paul Wash from Q-Risk and Craig Webb from RUSEC, and they'll be doing a webinar on personal safety, security, and crowded places and strategy. So please watch out for those and register, because I think all of these will be interesting, and I think there's a lot to learn from all these individuals. Furthermore, Shopcare, we have a participant ergonomics work stream. For those who don't know what that means, it's mainly you know, early intervention, early notification of discomfort, injury management, musculoskeletal harm reduction, that type of thing. We also have violent and aggressive behavior work stream. We've done quite a number of bit of work in that area with Skills VR and other parts. Unfortunately, I can't just mention just now as it's not been made public, but please watch out for that work stream because there's a lot of good things that's going to come out there. For those who don't know, violent and aggressive behavior is mainly individuals that are facing public and they receive quite a number of abuse, not just over the last 2 years with COVID, but it's an increasing thing that's occurring. Then please feel free to connect also with us if you want to know more of what we are doing and keep up to abreast what we're doing with our newsletters. And then lastly, as I've just mentioned, our webinars that's popping up. Oh, and there's one other thing is we are collaborating a bit with WorkSafe regarding a project on site markings. So if you want to know more about site markings, if you want to be, you know, have potential input to it, or just share any knowledge that you might have or experience in site markings, please also reach out to us. Your information will be really appreciated. So like I just mentioned earlier before, guys, we've got 3 poll questions that I would like to ask right now. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the first poll question, and we would really appreciate your response. So first poll question is popping up. It's a single answer question, guys. And basically it is, which industry do you represent today? I couldn't list all of them, guys, so please make sure that you select one. And if yours doesn't fall into that, you know, put other. I'll give a couple of seconds more for those individuals who haven't answered just yet. Okay, let's call it 5, 3, 2, 1, and go. I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. So we can see we've got about good mix, 11% from manufacturing, 9% retail, 9% agriculture, bit of construction, forestry going on, maritime as well, transport 3%, healthcare 11%, good, and other 50%. Yeah, unfortunately, guys, we're very limited to the number we can list here. Okay, second poll, guys, I'm going to quickly launch that one. Apologies. And launching. Are you interested in any of the below topics to connect with ShopCare? I've just mentioned them, you know, our webinar sharing sessions, industry critical risk exposure insights report is popping up in the next couple of days, one aggressive behavior work, critical risk work stream in general, site markings, participant economics, and our ShopCare newsletter. I'll give another 20 seconds for those to answer. Yeah, guys, this is a I forgot to say, this is a multi-choice answers. You can select as many as you want or as little as you want as well. All right, and I'll close the poll now. Sharing the results. Quite a number wants to see our webinar sharing sessions, critical risk report, by VIB, good results, critical risk, site markings. Great. Share, guys. And then last poll question before I hand over to Dr. Hillary. Here we go. It's a single answer question. Does your business have a mental well-being plan and or strategy? Yes, no, I'm not sure, or not applicable. Just a kind reminder for those who joined a little bit late, all the answers are anonymous, so please feel free to answer honestly. I'll give you guys another 10 seconds, and then I'll share the results. And 3, 2, 1, closing. Great. 52% said yes, 29% said no, 15% I'm not sure, and about 4% say it's not applicable to their business. Interesting. What are your thoughts, Dr. Hillary?
Well, encouraging that nearly half have got a policy.
Yeah.
That is quite unusual, actually. Mostly when I go and people don't have a wellbeing policy, so that's encouraging. Maybe we're talking to the converted today.
And that's good. That's appreciated. All right, guys. Then for the moment we've all been waiting for, Dr. Hilary is a registered psychologist with New Zealand Psychology Board. She has spent the last 33 years, teaching organizational psychology at university level in South Africa, Canada, and even New Zealand. She has worked with private and public sectors as a consultant, and she's currently also the director of a company called Leading Safety. In her time there, she has developed both the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forums, mental health and at work guides. And we do really appreciate, Dr. Hilary taking her time to come onto this webinar and share her experience as well as her knowledge with all of us. We do appreciate it. And I do thank you, Dr. Hilary, for making the time. And I'll be handing over to you now. The floor is yours, and I'll just disappear, but I'll still be here for support.
Super. Thank you very much, Wes. Okay. Well, first of all, it's probably good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be with you, even if I can't see you. I've put together a sort of a brief version of some of my thinking in this space. I could babble on this forever, so I have to try and be short and concise. So please feel free to answer the questions, use the question function, or if you've got any questions afterwards, I am able to stay on a little bit after 1 o'clock if anyone wanted to have a bit more of a conversation. So I'm going to start where I often do start with this belief. I think it is a mindset. I think it's a fundamental mindset that we need to have if we're serious about mental health in the workplace. We truly need to believe that everyone who goes to work should go home safe and healthy, both physically and mentally. What I'd like to introduce, though, is the concept that to get people home safe and healthy is obviously a legal obligation, which I'll go into very briefly. But I'd love you to understand that actually that legal obligation creates massive opportunities for us in terms of individual workers, but also in terms of what the organization can achieve. So very briefly, because I wouldn't want us to be doing this work purely because of a legal obligation, but I think it's really important that we understand our legal obligation. Under the Health and Safety at Work Act, as you probably all well know, that workers and other persons should be given the highest level of protection against harm to their health, safety, and welfare from work risk by eliminating and minimizing, etc. What I want to highlight is that health in the Health and Safety Work Act is defined as both physical and mental health. And in fact, if you do a word search of the Health and Safety at Work Act, you will only find the word mental twice. Once when it's defining health as physical and mental health, and a second time when it talks about a hazard and there's a reference there to mental fatigue. So as a starting point and as an absolute minimum, there's absolutely clear obligation under the Health and Safety at Work. However, as many of you will know, there are other acts that will also come into play here, the Employment Relations Act, the Human Rights Act, but the key act that I'm going to refer to then today will be the Health and Safety at Work Act. Opportunities that create, so obligations that create opportunities. What is the opportunity? The opportunity for each one of us, no matter what size your business may be, is to design the work so people can thrive. Therein lies the opportunity, and I'm going to unpack that in a little bit of detail as we go through. So I'd like us to all get on the same page about well-being for at least this next hour. And there are many, many definitions of well-being and mental health, all of which have their merit. One of the most commonly used one is the World Health Organization's definition. I, however, gravitate to this one, which is that well-being is an individual's ongoing state which enables a person to thrive or not. Now, it's not my own definition. It's a definition that coming from the British Safety Council. I like it. It's short, it's concise, and it really pulls out for me some of the key things that we need to understand about mental well-being and mental health. First of all, as many of you will know, because we've been talking about this a lot over the last while, is our mental health or our mental well-being does sit on a continuum. And we anchor it with different words, but the words I use is to say, at the one end of the mental health continuum, people are thriving. and then they could be going okay, or they could be struggling, or they could be really unwell to the point of being in crisis. So unwell to the point where you might see someone feeling that the only way out for them may be suicide. So really very, very distressed. But unwell could also be someone who is not necessarily clinically depressed or clinically anxious, but they're certainly not in a good space. So there's this range of types of mental health, if you want to call it that way, that sit on this continuum. And it gives me the opportunity to share with you, through the work I've done over the last probably 40 years, teased out what are the key characteristics of mental well-being that I think are fundamentally important for any organization if you are going to be serious about protecting the mental health of your people. First of all, we need to acknowledge is that mental well-being, mental health is universal. What I mean by that is every single one of us, every single day, right now, we can all put ourselves somewhere on that continuum. Okay? Mental well-being or mental health does not equate mental illness. Okay? Mental health is a range of different states. Sometimes we're thriving, sometimes we're going okay, sometimes we're struggling, sometimes we're unwell. So it is universal, but it's also very subjective. In other words, where I travel today on that mental health continuum may be quite different to where you are, where someone else, even in a similar context, all right? And so that's one of the real challenges when you try and actually protect people's mental health in the workplace, is it's not a one-size-fits-all. So what might be seen as particularly harmful in terms of the way the work is organized for one individual may not be harmful to another individual. And this is so different to physical risks. And if I can use noise here as an example, just very briefly, if someone had to say to you, I think the noise in the workshop or in the factory is at a level that it's damaging my hearing, the most common response would be, yeah, I get that because I understand that noise damages hearing. So why don't we go out there and measure the noise and see at what level that noise is. And if it's above a certain level, we'll go out and we'll put some controls in place. And we'd all agree that noise can harm people's hearing. We'd all agree that probably in terms of what might be the solutions or the controls to put in place. And thereafter, really what we need to make sure is that that our controls are working. But because of the subjective nature of things that harm our mental health, much more difficult to be able to say it's at this level at which harm will occur because it's subjective. And when it comes to what we will do to eliminate or minimize that harm, there might be a range of different options, some of which would work for some people and some which would not work for other people. So herein lies some of the challenges around risk to our mental health as opposed to risk to our physical health. So let me backtrack there. It's universal, it's subjective, and it's dynamic. So go back to the definition. It's an individual's ongoing state. Think of water to ice, ice to water. It can change, all right? And similarly, how we travel along this mental health can change is very dynamic. It can change, and it can change very quickly, and it could even change a few times in a short space of time. What we need to understand that to go in and try and get a handle on and measure people's well-being in the workplace is not as simple as maybe going out and doing an engagement survey, because what we're measuring here is something that is very movable and very dynamic, all right? And lastly, my fourth point around well-being that is fundamentally for us to get a head around is that it's holistic. By that I mean is we don't leave our work woes at work or our home woes at home. We bring these stuff backwards and forwards. And so I'm going to do a little poll shortly, but what I'm going to ask you to do in that poll is to currently land yourself right now, whatever the time might be, 12 on the 31st of March. Hard to believe that the first quarter of March is just about come and gone. But right now, how would you describe yourself in terms of that mental health continuum? Do you see yourself as thriving, going okay, struggling, or ill? Don't forget, your responses are absolutely anonymous. It will just get us help us to make some further reflection on that mental health continuum if I get a sense of where people are. So Wes, if you wouldn't mind putting that poll up for me, thank you.
Let's get another 10 seconds before I close the poll. Three, two, one, and go.
That's great. Thanks, Wes. So as everyone can have the result of, oh, we shared those results there, everyone can see that?
That's correct.
Okay, so interesting, folks. You can see there that 13% of you have put yourself in the green zone, in the thriving zone, which is fantastic. And I'll give you some explanation of what that means in a second. 58% say we're going okay, 26% struggling, and 3% of you saying actually, you know, you may be further down than just struggling. You may actually be feeling at one level quite distressed around this. And that's interesting because if I had to go into a general population, what I would tend to see is around about 20% of people in thriving, 20% unwell, more people going okay, and then a tapering off to struggling. However, with COVID, what I have been seeing is there's been a shift, which your responses aren't reflecting, which is good. I'm delighted to see that. What I have been seeing, generally speaking, though, is that there's been a drop in terms of going okay and an increase in people in terms of struggling. It's almost that in the general population, you'd see that 58 and 26% reversed. So the good news for those of us on the you know, sharing this moment together today is that, you know, given my maths here, you know, that's 60-70% of people feeling like they're thriving or going okay, which is great. Just bear in mind though that it's subjective and that other people may not be quite traveling quite as well as you are. So thanks, Les. Wes, I'm going to go on to the next set of slides. So can I get on to my next slides? Right. You know, one of the things I'd like us to think of, though, is, you know, under our obligations and obviously create opportunities, is to start linking this mental health continuum to work. And the reality is, as you know, as well as I know, that not all work is equal. There is work that enables people to thrive, enables people to feel positive, enthusiastic about their lives. And what we tend to do is we call that good work. And I don't just use those words loosely because that's maybe a way of describing that end of the mental health continuum. It is actually based on a body of knowledge that is referred to as good work, although WorkSafe has got a program in the moment which they're referring to that as better work. But good work is where we have built in the protective factors that we know support people to sit at that more positive end of the mental health continuum. At the far end, I have toxic work. Now, I know that's a harsh word, and I know for many of you that will sound jarring, but I have been very, I've stuck to my guns around that because I am absolutely aware of in my travels in my working career that there are workplaces that are toxic. And, you know, you don't have to go too far ahead than other than what we've seen in some law firms over the last few years, what we've seen in high performing sports in New Zealand. And I'm sure at a personal level, you all have had experience where you would have been in yourself, or you have seen a workplace or a work team where actually people really got unwell as a result of the work. So I know it's a harsh word, but it's really describing a situation where the way the work is managed and designed and organized is actually having a significant impact on people's mental health. And in the middle, I use these words decent work. And decent work, I beg and borrow from the Human Rights Act. In section 13 in the Human Rights Act, it talks about decent work as where you've got minimum, you know, equal pay for equal work, and you've got some minimum standards. For those of you sharing this session with me today, my challenge to you is we don't want to settle for decent work. We certainly want to avoid toxic work in terms of its impact on people's mental health. Our goal is, the opportunity is, to create a work environment that constitutes or meets the criteria of what we consider high quality work environments or good work. However, I must say, and I'm learning in this field as I go, someone did challenge me the other day with the use of the word good work, and I thought it was quite a good challenge, and I'll share it with you. They said that good work also sounded a little bit average. And shouldn't we be high achieving, striving for something higher than that? And so I am in the midst of thinking to myself that maybe that good work for thriving should really be maybe what I should call thriving work. So, watch this space. There might be some changes along the way. But let's try to understand what those bookends look like. When we talk about thriving, those 13% of you that went into thriving, hopefully this rings true for you. That this is when a person feels and functions well across multiple domains of their life, not just their work life, their personal life, but in their community, etc. And I won't read through all those bullet points. You can read as well as I can, but you can see from the theme of those bullet points that there's a real positiveness around what thriving looks like. It's around confidence and good working relationships and the ability to conflict, but it's the ability to speak up and challenge and not feel that you're going to be humiliated, embarrassed. It's a really good place for us to be. And as I say, in the general population in New Zealand, I would see around about 20% people sitting in there. So your results are a little bit lower than I would tend to see. They've sort of squeezed themselves more into the going okay space. On the other end of that mental health continuum is the mental harm. It's where people are unwell. And I think it is helpful, if you're not aware, that WorkSafe over the last year or two, probably two now, has actually done some work around this, and they've defined mental harm. And this is WorkSafe as the regulator of our workplaces definition of mental harm. Mental harm occurs when a person experiences a significant cognitive, so think of that as your intellectual functioning, emotional, behavioral impact arising from or exacerbated by one or more work-related risk factors. And that harm may be immediate or gradual. It may be single, as a result of a single or repeated exposure, and it can range from mild psychological difficulties to severe psychological difficulties like clinical depression, post-traumatic stress, etc. Couple of things I want to just highlight in this without taking up too much time is the first of all is the word exacerbated. I'd like you to take note of that. What it's saying is it's not just about how you manage your work and organize your work. It's also because that's what you can influence. But if someone comes into your workplace and they've had a significant challenge or they're working with a challenge and your workplace exacerbates that, that would also constitute harm. So you can't be responsible for what happens in people's personal lives, but remember, universal, subjective, dynamic, and holistic. People do not separate out their personal work life. So if someone has an issue, and they might well have managed the issue pretty well, and they suddenly land up in a situation at work and it's exacerbated, that would consider mental harm. So let me make this a story for you. I was asked by an organization recently, they told me that they had a member of staff, in terms of their childhood, they had experienced some significant challenges, and they had spent significant amounts of their time at that struggling, unwell end of the continuum. However, they had managed through support, etc., to move themselves strongly into the going okay side. I'm not suggesting they were thriving, but they were going okay. And all of a sudden, in their workplace, they're now exposed to a supervisory style, a supervisor who manages by yelling, slamming doors, a lot of negative behavior. And this person who was going okay slips back to struggling, to getting really unwell. Now, in that definition, that would say that actually the work is exacerbated, and that would constitute fall under that definition. And the last thing I want to say about this, and I think it's important for you to understand, is that ACC, as the workplace regulator, has a slightly different view of what they would compensate in terms of mental harm in the workplace. ACCs, as they do physical harm, it has to be immediate and it has to come from a single event. So they will not acknowledge mental harm that is gradual or from a repeated exposure. So they will acknowledge if there's violence in the workplace and someone experienced a psychological a condition as a result of that one-off violence, they would see that as mental harm that they would compensate for. But if it was harm that occurred gradually, so let's make it a case of a social worker, just because we can also relate to that example, a social worker who over time is exposed to some extremely challenging and traumatizing stories in people's lives and copes quite well, but over time, through repeated exposure, starts to get moved on that mental health continuum. WorkSafe would say, ACC would say, that's not mental harm in the workplace. Now, personally, I think that WorkSafe have got it right. I think that mental harm is distinctly gradual, can also be immediate, but it's absolutely, in most workplaces, it will come from repeated exposure and it will come in gradually. So, interesting storylines as we start to become more mature in this space. But here's what I'd like you to take away. You can count on that at least at any point in time, no matter how small or big your business is that either directly or indirectly, 20% of your employees will be affected by a mental health challenge. Either they'll be experiencing something themselves, they'll be in that sort of struggling, unwell end of the continuum, or they'll be supporting a friend or a family in that. So your figures on that little poll didn't indicate that. And so maybe I'm preaching to the converted or talking to the converted, because I would hate to be preaching, but talking to the converted. That'll be interesting to if you knew that what was the situation in your own workplaces. So obligations and opportunities. Your obligation is to prevent mental harm. There's a definition from WorkSafe. Your opportunity is to enable people to thrive. So what can you do, whether you're small or large? This is the mental wellbeing framework that I developed for the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum 2 years ago, and it's now used quite extensively across many businesses. And it is a sense-making framework. It is not prescriptive. It's a way to help you, those of you who've got your wellbeing policy in place, it's to help you say, are we doing everything we need to do? So our argument would be, is that there are two things here. You've got an obligation and you've got an opportunity. You can also work proactively or you can work reactively. Now you can see through the center of that diagram sits the mental health continuum in a color coding, not in words, graying down through to the sort of reddy tones. And there's two sides there, the obligation side and the opportunity side. And there's actually two levels of being the top ones being proactive, the bottom ones being reactive. So let me talk through. And I'd like you to think, as I talk through, could you populate these different sections of this framework with things that you've currently got in place or that you're currently doing to protect your people and prevent mental harm? So obligation piece is where you would be proactively looking at the work. And I'm saying that very carefully, I'm going to repeat it. We're looking at the work, not the individual. We're looking at the extent to which there are risks to people's mental health as a result of the way the work is managed and organized and designed. Do we know what they are? And if we do know what they are, have we put in some good health and safety language, some controls to risk to eliminate or minimize it? And in addition, because it's not an or, it's an and in addition, are you proactively building in those aspects of a mentally healthy workplace that we know about? Things like flexibility, involvement in decision making, managing change accurately, providing adequate resources, etc. I'll come back to those in a minute. So that's the protect space. The foster phase is where we're also working proactively, but our focus has moved from the work to the individual. And what we're doing in this space is a bit like vaccinations and boosters. We are building up people's capability to deal with life's challenges as they came along. As a person who's just finished my 7 days of isolation, I'm awfully pleased that I did have a booster, and that when I got COVID, I was not hit as severely as I could have been. This is the space. We proactively build up people's capability, because remember, mental well-being is universal, subjective, dynamic, and holistic. All of us at some points in time will dip down in that mental health continuum to be struggling. We may not all get to the point that we're actually in crisis or really unwell, but we will all struggle. So what can we do to help people build up their capability? So this is the world of things like resiliency programs. It's where we create an awareness of what mental health is, where we build up the capability of our people leaders to be able to know how to spot when someone's struggling and how to go in and have a conversation with them. This is the work we do. We don't wait for people to struggle before we do this capability build piece. However, there's a dotted line between foster and reclaim, because sometimes the things you would do to build up capability might be the same interventions that you would deal when someone is in the reclaim space. The reclaim space is where someone has drifted into that struggling zone. They're not to the point that they're in crisis or very distressed, but we want to reverse the flow and get them moving back along to going okay. So some great examples here. I remember, I'm not being prescriptive, but some of you might be aware of the Mental Health Foundation's work around 5 Ways to Wellbeing, or you may be aware of Mason Drury's work around Tarafar model around mental health. Whole lots of frameworks you could be using to organize the sorts of things you would do to help people reclaim and restore. And then lastly, the last section is the support space. This is the world of employee assistance programs. This is the world of providing people with mental and psychological counseling, medical and psychological counseling, return to work programs. And absolutely you need to think of having those in place, but they are the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff and they aren't sufficient. So it's a sense-making framework, and hopefully you'll find it helpful to go back and look at what you currently have in place to support the mental health of people, which remember is your obligation. But the opportunity sits here is when you can know what might be harming people and you're actually addressing it, when you're actively building up people's capability and you're helping people restore if they're struggling, and if they are really unwell, you've got something in place to support them. Now, from my perspective, having worked in this space for a long time, if I can share with you a reflection across New Zealand businesses, sadly, even to this day, we do a lot more work focused on the support and reclaim space. Now, the foster, this reclaim and this board, they are individually based. They're about fixing up the individual, and well, support and reclaim are largely fixing up the individual. Foster claim is about boosting the individual, but they're an individual focus. And I'd like to leave this thought with you, and if it's the only thing you take away from today, I would be happy, which is we have to stop just thinking we can fix up the individual. We have to also start looking at the work. It's no use sending people on resiliency building programs and teaching them how to meditate and how to manage their time and giving them an app to monitor their well-being, and a host of other things that we do in that space if we leave the work untouched. I'm not suggesting you don't do those other things. I am suggesting it's not an or, it's an and, but it fundamentally starts by looking at the cause, not just the symptoms. And we don't want to only react when people are struggling. We need to react when people are actually going okay. So, 58% of you said you were going okay. That's the point at which, I would say there's work for us to do to either push people into thriving or to how do we maintain that sense of well-being. So we have another quick little poll that we want to ask you to do, and that is simply to reflect on your own organizations and make an assessment of the extent to which you think you might be sitting in using these strategies. So again, it's multiple choice. So I think, Wes, you don't have to have one, you can have as many as you like. Am I right?
No, I think these are single answer questions.
Oh, it's a single answer. Okay, so which indicate the following mental approaches you're going to does well. That's right. Sorry, I'm forgetting my own poll.
no, I do apologize, guys. Just to rectify, Dr. Hill is correct. It is multi-choice. My apologies. A bit of a brain slip there. So numbers are trickling in, which is good. We'll give about another 15, 20 seconds. Another 5 seconds. Close.
Great.
and close. I'll share quickly the results. There we go.
That's great. Thanks, Wes. Okay, folks. So great news to see that 31% of you are saying you think you do the protect work well. I'm going to explore a little bit on that shortly, and you may find that there's still work you could do in that space. And the 80% in the support space does not surprise me at all, because that's what we have tended to think of as well-being. Well-being is about supporting people who are really distressed, and absolutely we need to do that. And it's good to hear that 80% of you saying you're doing that well. What would concern me is the foster and reclaim space. Reclaim, particularly because after 2 years of COVID, we know people have been battling, and there's probably real room for us at the moment to do some good restore work to prevent people moving down even further on that mental health continuum. And, you know, there's always good work we could be doing around the protect space. Right. Wes, I didn't have another poll question, did I?
Yes, you have one more.
Oh yeah, I think my next one is what does not well. So let's add this, let's see, yeah.
Multi-choice, guys, just to rectify, or to be clear, it's multi-choice. Good numbers trickling in. We'll give about another 20 seconds or so.
Okay.
And 3, 2, 1, and close. I'm sharing results.
Thank you. So guys, look, I realize this is rough and ready, but it is interesting that when I ask you what you're not doing well, you know, there's the larger percentage, well, it's 55 of you saying actually we could probably do protect work well. So I think we had 25% saying 31% you're doing well, but there's still some space to do some work in this. And of course, it is, you can see that support reversing itself. So in use of this framework, remember what I'm saying, it's a sense-making framework. One of the things that you could think of doing, this is open source work, you can download these guides off the Business Leaders Forum's website, is to do what I call a mapping process, which is actually look at what you currently have in place in terms of your offerings to support people's mental health, and ask yourself the question, is this a foster piece of work, you know, a protect or whatever? And that helps you do a bit of a stock take, so that when you look at what you want to put in place, you're not doubling up, or you're actually addressing areas where you've got a gap. Because as you know, there's a lot of wellbeing activities out there. You could spend an awful lot of money on what you're doing. And I mean, I have no problem with spending money on wellbeing, but the thing is, what you need to do is you want to make sure you're doing it in a considered way. Now, last point on this, because I want to move off it for a second, is to say, this is not a matter of good or bad. It's not a matter of saying, you know, you should do this or that. What it is a matter of, and I stick very strongly to my guns on this as well, which is you should be working across all 4 areas if you are going to have a long-term impact on mental well-being. It's like any game of rugby or soccer or hockey or netball or whatever your league, whatever your favorite game may be. A game in one half is not a particularly good game. A game in one quarter is not a particularly good game. A game that is a good game to watch plays the full field. Although someone said to me the other day, playing the full field actually doesn't have a nice connotation. So what I should say really is you've got to cover all your bases. Right. What we've seen across New Zealand and actually internationally is that the one area, and I think your results reflected as well, that we haven't done as good a piece of work as other has been the protect space. And for those of you who may be familiar with ISO standards, you may know that in June last year, ISO developed their standard on psychological healthy workplaces, ISO 45003. And I'm not going to go into those in any great detail. You can download them off the website. They're the one ISO standard that you can actually get a readable copy with not having to pay for it. But the essence of it is that if we go into the protect space, we should be adopting a risk assessment process in exactly the same as we adopted a risk assessment process for physical risks. But we have to be very careful of saying what I see very often, which is that we see psychosocial risk as a risk. Could you imagine a critical risk register that said we have physical risks? You wouldn't. You would say we have physical risks, and they look like working in confined spaces, man-machine interaction, hazardous substances, working at height, etc., etc. It's time for us to do the same when we look at the risk to people's mental health. It's not good enough to have an umbrella term of psychological harm or mental harm or psychological or psychosocial risk on your critical risk register. At least you're acknowledging it, and that's better than nothing. But what we need to be saying, actually the risk might be, let's take it in a shop care context, you know, in a retail context, it might be actually the key risk is abuse or physical or violence in the workplace or abuse from the public. That's the risk that should sit on the critical risk register, not psychosocial risk. These risks are quite different, as I said earlier, to physical risk, but they are across every single job across your organization or your business, no matter how big or small, no matter what level or function in the organization. But they're challenging because, remember, they're subjective. They're much easier for us. They're not that easy for us to observe them or measure them, and there's not that clear cause and effect. The protect work also requires us to do good design work. There is some guidance there when you get the slides on the international guidelines, but I just wanted to indicate that internationally, if you look what the UK is doing, what France is doing, what Germany is doing with the International Labour Organization, everyone is saying risk assessment approach is the way to do. So last little bit of information I want to share with you is the second piece of work I developed for the Business Leaders Forum, which was a deep dive on the protect space. And again, this work is open source and you can access these guides and these frameworks. And this is just a condensed version so that I can get it on the slide. So what we've done here is said, okay, well, if we are serious about identifying our mental health risks, how do we go about doing that? So this is, again, a sense-making framework. You can see the mental health continuum going across the top, not in words, but in colors, although I've reversed the direction. You can see down the spine of that the framework are 4 work areas, aspects of work related to the task, like workload, challenging tasks, working conditions, aspects related to the individual, like opportunities to learn or progress or work having meaning, aspects related to the social parts of our work, and aspects related to more organizational factors. And on either side of that spine are, on the left-hand side, on the harmful side, are potential psychosocial hazards, if I'm using the correct word, or risks to your mental well-being, things that can harm you. And on the other side are things that are protective factors. These are the good design pieces. And if we can design these things in, and what the mental well-being design, and you can also download this workbook off the forum's website, is there is a workbook that you can use. You might need some help in terms of getting some facilitators trained up, and we do that through the forum at no cost, particularly if you are a forum member. We would get people who are doing the same work. You can't do this with group people from a range of different types of work. So let's just say it is your night shift in the distribution center, and you get them to say, work through these contrasting pairs and actually identify the extent to which that particular aspect of their work is either harming or protecting them. And so that you can, through that process, actually tease out what might be the specific harmful or protective factors for a particular type of work in your organization. And it's only when we get to that point where we actually are able to identify the specific risks, harmful risks to people, and the protective factors, that we can actually say we're doing good protect work. So this framework and this process is really the Rolls-Royce version. I'd just like to signal to people I'm also currently working on a process that may be more appropriate for use for smaller businesses that don't have the luxury of taking, people out for larger chunks of time. So there is some work that I'm doing in that space as well. So, what I'm going to probably sign off here. You'll see there are a whole host of barriers to doing this work that you don't want to be naive about, and you might want to do a bit of a double check on whether your organization is ready to do some of this work. But lastly, from my perspective, when we talk about mental by design work, it does require a willingness on your part to focus on the work, not just the people. It requires a willingness to question how the work has been done. And just because it's been done in that way forever doesn't mean to say that that's the best way for people's mental health. It needs curiosity about how things could be different. It needs courage to be able to make the change. And it needs patience to allow some of those changes to embed. So, folks, that's really what I wanted to share with you. I think we're going to go into a bit of a question and answer session, where so I'll hand over to you. How do we deal with this one?
Yeah. So, guys, just before we head into the question and answer bit, we have one final poll. It's a quick and easy one, guys. So I'm just gonna.
Oh yeah, you got a poll. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just gonna shoot off this last poll question, and we can head into the question and answering session. This one, guys, a single answer: has this webinar been of value to you, and do things differently in your business? Yet again, all answers are anonymous, and we do appreciate your participation. I'm just quickly monitoring the chat. Interesting, great. It's been a good session so far. Okay, we'll give another 10 seconds or so to answer this one. Okay, great. Then questions. Let's go. If you're ready, Hillary?
Yeah.
All right. First question from you mentioned that mental harm in the workplace comes from repeated exposure. What about PTSD from an incident? I've seen this a number of times.
Right. Okay, good question. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that it only comes from gradual harm. It absolutely can come from an incident. All I'm suggesting is that the ACC will respond to mental harm that comes from an incident, but they won't acknowledge harm that comes gradual. But absolutely, it can be both.
Okay. Next question. What is your view on mental health first aid work programs?
Good question. I'm a little bit conflicted about them. I'm largely conflicted around the name. Mental first aid. Do we really want to wait for people to be injured before we actually give them a bandage to fix them up? So I think the use of the language is problematic for me, although I do understand that when you look at the content of many of the mental first aid programs, it's not just about Band-Aid stuff. However, also when you look at the content, if you ever are looking for mental health first aid, I think, can you just think mental health continuum? Is your mental first aid program looking only at providing people with some knowledge and guidance around struggling and unwell? Struggling and unwell. In that case, I would think that's not a particularly good program. We really want to start acknowledging that mental health is not mental illness, and mental health sits across the full continuum. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we've got a question here. Unfortunately, I don't know by whom, as they are anonymous. And I believe this question was raised when we had the mental well-being by design slide on.
Right, okay.
The question is, what is the website you are referring to?
So guys, I'm referring to the New Zealand Business Health and Safety Forum website. If you just Google New Zealand Business Leaders Forum, it now just goes under the title of www.forum.org. It is a not-for-profit, it's membership organization that does incredibly good work in this space. Well, I think so, shouldn't I? Because I get contracted to do some of the work. So the work I've been sharing with you has been guides that I've developed for them. They don't sit on my website at Leading Safety. They're sitting on the forum's website. They're open source and you can download them.
Excellent.
So www.forum.org.nz.
Thank you. Then we've got a question from Madeleine. How do you take leaders and CEOs on a journey of taking mental health seriously versus focusing on operations?
Gosh, $1 million question that, Madeleine, and a really, really good question. And that's why I would suggest you know, when you get the slides, you look at some of the barriers. One of the key barriers is senior leaders not taking this seriously. And what you need to do is you need to shift their mindset. So what I often will what I often get asked to do and is actually, before we even start talking about what might be mental health initiatives or what the program might be looking like, is to actually give your senior leaders the opportunity for them to understand what mental health is, to understand their obligations, to understand the range of things that they could be actually doing, to see the opportunities of having a thriving culture. So I often don't even use the word mental well-being when I'm talking to senior leaders. I talk about the value of having a thriving culture, the value of having a culture when most of the people in that organization, as a result of their work, are sitting on that thriving end or going okay, thriving end. And that's usually how I will be able to get them to be at least interested in it. Of course, you know, you can do obligations piece because they do have an obligation, but I actually prefer to say, yep, look, you have an obligation, but don't worry about that. Look at the opportunity you can get if you do this stuff, and you've got people thriving rather than being unwell. So that's the tack I would normally go for.
Totally agree there. Another question here is, how long would you say it takes a person who suffered from burnout to recover?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I can actually give you a definitive answer on that, because remember, universal, subjective, dynamic and holistic, very subjective. So, you know, it really it will vary from person to person, but I think really what makes the difference is the support we wrap around people and the adjustments we prepare to make with the work. So again, even with burnout, I would say I'm never really interested, even though I'm a psychologist, of just fixing up people. I really would be saying, let's also look at the context in which they work in. How can we make adjustments to the work, as well as providing people with strategies to start looking after themselves. And one of the frameworks I would really endorse and certainly support is the Mental Health Foundation's 5 Ways to Wellbeing as a way of actually looking after each other. But if someone has really got burnout, you know, that is really at the far end of that mental health continuum, and they probably need more strategies than just some simple self-care strategies.
Yeah, and Anonymous, I'm not sure who, I can't see your name, but we do have a subject matter expert as well, talking a little bit later in May on burnout as well. Yeah. So look forward for that one and register for that event. Then from Deborah, do trauma-informed organizational practices work?
Do trauma-informed organizational practices work?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure I really get to be honest, I'm not quite sure I get your question. Do trauma-informed organizations? So if you're meaning, do practices like I see quite often where the capability build is around helping people to deal with trauma, that has mixed, I have seen mixed results in it. If you're saying do trauma-informed organizational practices, yeah, sorry, I probably would like to take that question more offline, Wes. I'm not quite sure I totally get that question.
That's okay. I can ask her there for a bit of clarification around that. Guys, we're running out of time. I've got about 2 more questions I can go, unless you want to stay on, and if Hillary is okay to stay on for a couple of other questions, we can. But let's move on to the next question. Can you recommend a survey that would help us understand where our people see our issues are?
There are a variety of different types of surveys around, you know, and I don't want to say everything leads back to me. You know, I do this work on a regular basis for people to do wellbeing surveys. I just think what you've got to be cautious of, though, is member, universal, subjective, dynamic. It's dynamic. So what I really resist is saying, well, we can do a snapshot of your organization right now, and therefore we know what's in place, because actually in a month or 2 months' time, that might be quite different. So rather than seeing it as a survey approach, I think you're looking at ways of touching base with how people are traveling, and also looking at the organizational practices that really support well-being and measuring some of those things. So again, I can't recommend any particular survey, but there are a range of them, and there are some particularly good measures of well-being. The World Health Organization's 5 have been well used by many organizations. There are some single questions. The one question that around well-being that seems to be really having some good impact is, or sorry, some good results, is that just the one question, in general, how satisfied have you been with your life over the last while is a particularly good question for tracking people along that mental health continuum. So, you know, and if I've got lots of ideas and questions that I can share with people if anyone wants to contact me on that.
Last question, guys, and then if you want to, let's do the last question first. Okay, I would like to use the conflicting indicators template when the business is working through a change process. An example, structure which changes work tasks. Have you seen this working? Anything we need to be aware of?
So if you're meaning the conflicting indicators, if you're looking at that mental well-being by design with what I call the contrasting pairs, if that's what you're meaning, absolutely. I see it being used for risk assessment work. I've seen it used as an individual, you know, coaching tool. If you're saying, look, we're about to go through a major change, which of these factors are likely to be at risk? Absolutely, you can use it. It's never meant to be prescriptive. It's always meant to be used as a way of tracking your impact of work on people's mental health. And rather than defaulting back to what many of us do when we think of what aspects of our work impact on mental health, what we tend to do is go to workload or to bullying and harassment. Actually, if I can share with you, the hazard that seems to be most prominent at the moment wherever I go is we don't give people enough time to take breaks and to restore. So people not taking holidays, people not taking time out, not taking time to actually even have a break during the day. That doesn't normally pop up to your mind when you talk about psychosocial risks. But actually, this is a process to really say, actually, we're going through a major change. Which of these things may be at play? Absolutely, you could use it for that. And I wish you all the best if you do.
Thank you. Guys, basically our time is up. If Dr. Hilary has got a couple of more minutes to answer 2 or 3 questions, I'm happy to carry on. But that is basically it from our end. Dr. Hilary, if you are time limited, I understand completely. But
no, I've got some time. I've got something at 1:30, but I've got some time.
Excellent. Okay, then from Kristen, could Dr. Bennett advise where we can download the ISO 45003?
Yeah. So just Google ISO 45003, and what you'll find is it might take you to a draft copy, which you can download. The draft copy is no different to the final copy, but you can also go through the British Standards Institute, so the BSI site, and on that site, you will get the free-to-read version. It is no different to the downloadable draft version. And if you get stuck, send me an email and I'll send you the links.
Awesome. Then Lisa, what suggestions are there for when exposure starts to impact on tolerance, example, and things start to become chronic and a person becomes more sensitive to events that previously would not have bothered them?
Yeah. You know what, one of the things that we know around mental health is that people, we demonstrate it by changes in our attitude, changes in our behavior, changes in our ability to make decisions. So I think your question is saying is that when you start to see someone doing things a little bit differently or responding a little bit differently to the way that they would normally be, for me, that's my early warning, or your early warning sign that someone is tracking not so well in terms of that mental health continuum. And that's a point at which you would want to go in and have a conversation. Unfortunately, I hope I'm answering your question, but unfortunately, so often when we see those changes occurring, what we tend to do is say, oh, that person's under a little bit of stress, they're really battling, I'll back off and give them some space. Please don't do that. Step in and say, I've noticed that you're a little bit more grumpy than you normally are, or you've got really quiet. Is there something that I can help you with? So changes in attitude and behavior and performance, in appearance, are often indicators that people are not traveling quite as well as they would normally be. So I hope that's answered your question.
I think so. Before I ask the last question, Dr. Hilary, can you just move on to the last slide that's got your contact details and our contact details on there for people so they know where to find yourself on the site.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
sure. I will do that.
yeah, sometimes we just
There
need
we
to
go.
click. There we go. Then a question here from Blexi is, Dr. Hillary, we have an employee that is going through some health issues,
Right.
non-work related, and is taking a toll on the person overall their well-being. The person is passionate about their work they do and does not want to put them down. We have provided all the support, EAP, time off. Legally, can we ask a person to stop the person from working?
And this is a question from my husband, who's an employment lawyer. I'm not going to give you legal advice on that, but what I would say is that bear this in, keep your health and safety at work act in mind. That if someone, as a result of their current state of mental health, constitutes a risk to themselves or others, then you have every right to step in and either eliminate or minimize that risk. Okay, so that's the point. That's a question you need to ask yourself: has that person got to the point that they actually are at a risk to themselves? And don't forget, you've got obligations to others. So sometimes what we do is we wrap support around individuals as we want to, as good employers, and with all the best intention in the world. And inadvertently, by doing that, we actually load up the workload or things for other people. So bear in mind your responsibilities to all your staff. So I don't have enough details to say whether you could ask them to leave or not, but I would say you absolutely have your in safe ground if you're wanting to go in and have a conversation, which is actually, are you able to do the job you're employed to do? Have I given you enough support to be able to do that? Have I made any work? Have we made the work adjustments? But neither are you a charity, neither are you expected to keep people who aren't able to do their work. So again, might be the question you want to take to the likes of my husband, who's retired, so I'm not looking for work for him.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Then, guys, thank you very much for attending today and participating in the polls. Thank you again, Dr. Hillary, for taking the time today and sharing your experience and your knowledge with all of us. We really, really do appreciate it. So, guys, just before we go, just make sure there's our contact details. Make sure that you follow us on our YouTube channel as well. We'll be putting this recording up there by next week, so you'll have access to that as well.